Okay, so today I thought I would do a video on how I drafted my Saratoga bodice using the apportioned scale that is printed in Fashions of the Gilded Age by Frances Grimble. I did a blog post about this and I wrote the instructions in there, but I feel like I just didn't articulate it very well in the post, so I thought it would be better to do a video. It might be more self-explanatory. So what you're going to start by doing is finding your overbust measurement over the corset that you're going to want to wear under this bodice. You're going to want to measure in centimeters and then divide it by 2 so that you find your half bust measurement. And then in the back of the book in Appendix A, all of the scales are printed out here. And you can see some of them are longer and some of them are shorter. They're printed in sections of 10. So some of the units are just smaller units because they're smaller measurements, and that's why she was able to print 2. And then some of them, there was only room for just one set of 10 in the book. But you're going to want to trace or photocopy a bunch of them because you want it to be as long as the longest number of units on the pattern that you're going to trace or the pattern that you're going to draft. So like the bodice that I'm going to draft, the longest measurement that's in here is 52 units. So I'm going to need to trace out at least 6 of these so that I can have enough to measure out 52 units. And I'm going to be using the scale that is for the 46 centimeter bodice. And I need pencil, scissors, paper, and tape. So I'm going to start by tracing. Like I said, you can also photocopy. It's probably easier, but I don't have a photocopy at home. So when I first did this, I just traced. You just have to be really careful to trace the lines as closely as possible. You might want to use a ruler. I'm kind of freehanding it just because I'm dangerous that way. It's always a good idea to label your patterns and your rulers too, just so that you remember what it is that you're tracing out. Sorry, I don't know if you can hear that. The dog is jumping at me and snorting. I'm not sure why. Okay, so there's my first little section of my ruler. I am going to go trace a bunch more and then I'll show you how to tape them together. I now have 6 of my units of 10 of my 46 centimeter scale cut out. So now I have to tape them end to end. And the little tab at the bottom of each unit is where you're going to put the first unit of the next one. And then, if it's easier for you, you can take that 0 that's on the last unit of each scale, and the first one will become a 10, and then the second one will become a 20, and the third one will become a 30, and so on. And that way, while you're actually drawing out your pattern, it'll be easier to count how many units out you are. So I'm going to start taping these. I might just use the grid of my cutting table to make sure that I'm keeping them all straight. It's probably much more precise to photocopy these rather than tracing. And if I had the foresight to bring this book to work and photocopy it, I would have, but I did not, so now I have to trace instead and just do my best. Okay, now I'm going to go get a big piece of paper and start drafting out the pattern. Alright, so I have my big piece of paper. You want to make sure that it's at least as wide as the number of units that you need, probably more than that obviously, and at least as long as the number of units plus what's going to end up being your waist measurement. If you need to, you can always tape extra at the bottom if you need more room for the bottom of the front of your bodice. What I'm going to do is actually tape it right to my sewing table here because it's got a grid on it, and that's going to help me draft up the pattern. So I'm just going to make sure I have it lined up square, and then I'm going to tape it on here with masking tape. I'm now going to draw, it's sort of an X and Y axis. It shows on the pattern here, it just helps you keep the side and the bottom straight. Sort of like an X and Y axis. So I'm just going to draw those on here. You want it to be a little in from the edge of your paper because, I don't know if you can see, but it does come out like half a unit from the one side axis. Okay, so then what you're going to start doing is just counting out how many units to each individual point on the bodice as printed in here. So from the top corner A, which I'm going to say is here, I would count down 9 units on the axis and then over 1.5 units. So I'm going to take my little yardstick here and line it up with A, and on the axis I'll mark 9 units down. And then I will mark 1.5 units over, and that will be the point at the front of my collar there. And then along the top here, from A, I'm going to count over 9.5 units. And that's going to be the shoulder where it meets the collar. So I'm just going to go along and just mark all of the points in here, and once they're all in, then we can start smoothing out the curves with a French curve and rulers. So here I go. I'm going to start sketching some of these curves in because otherwise it can get confusing about what's where. The shoulder one's a little weird because it has a straight line and then from the top to the back point, and then it tells you to raise it slightly by 1/2 unit. So that's the one. The shoulders are the one measurement where it sort of is working off of a diagonal line rather than a straight line like the rest of them. Max, stop. The other weird thing is there's a note here in the book. This is side length from F to H, 16.5 to 17 units. So F is here, here, and H is going to be a point somewhere down here that you have to determine based on your side measurement. So it's going to be the measurement from your underarm to your waistline. So that's why you're the one that has to determine that. It's going to vary from person to person. So you can literally just take your tape and measure down your side. I'm just going to do that right now off camera. I'm going to put mine at 17 units. I didn't think I was that long-waisted, but when I hold the ruler up, it seems like 17 is pretty short. So I'm going to start with that, and I can always shorten it later when I do the mock-up if it doesn't fit properly. So that's H. No, I'm sorry, I'm measuring wrong. This is H. This one is much shorter than my last bodice because my last bodice was a basque, so it went down over the waist and onto the hips. So as you can see, here is my finished drafted bodice. I copied it straight from the book here, following all of the unit measurements marked using my handy dandy unit yardstick that we made earlier. And you can see the pattern that I drafted up came out looking pretty similar to what's drawn in the book. So that's good news. That's always what we're going for. So now the next step would be for me to cut this out. Luckily for this one, none of the pattern pieces overlap like some of the other patterns in the book do. So this one I can just cut out these pieces and put them directly onto my muslin and then do the mock-up and see if it fits. One note that I did realize from making the last pattern is that these patterns are not drafted with seam allowance. So I could either redraw this with seam allowance or just cut around it with enough seam allowance, but that's an important thing to note because I didn't realize that for my first one. And from now on, I know I have to add seam allowance for this one. So hopefully that was helpful. I know it was kind of hard to follow along while I was drawing. It was hard to see the points that I was marking out. But if you have any questions, feel free to ask me in the comments or get in touch with me on Instagram. And I hope you have good luck drafting your bodice. Thanks, bye!